Here we go.
Hey, it's a goofy topic here.
How are you doing?
Hey, good. Yeah, like I said, I had that car for a few months and finally got rid of it, so I'm pretty happy.
Nice. We got a new debater for the callout.com. He's can you hear me?
I got you. You looking?
Okay.
Are you talking to somebody else, or?
Yeah, Andrew Gibson. He's he seems pretty solid. He's got a strong, legitimate debate background.
Oh, okay, that's cool. I saw Joel. I debated him on the free will a couple weeks ago. I think he's pretty new too. And do you have your first debate for the competition up yet?
No, it'll be well, it's up, but
I mean, you have the date set and everything.
Yeah, we're set.
Yeah, I'm on the 6th, and I noticed whoever I'm up against hasn't done any on here yet, so
should be exciting.
I don't know who they are, but yeah, so it should be a hot topic.
Yeah. So the wrestler is the superior athlete. All right. So we're going to start off with
superior to the couch potato. Yes, definitely.
Yes. Superior athlete, right? So athlete is a person who's proficient in sports and other forms of
chess is included.
It's a person who is proficient in sports and other forms of physical exercise. The wrestler is kind of a broad term. So I'm going to read you the definition, and I'm going to make some inherent changes to it. Is a person who takes part in wrestling, especially for sport. Now, the sports that it combines is not just pure folk and Greco. So we're going to add in folk, Greco, catch-can, and professional wrestling, all encompassing into the term wrestling. Now, by virtue of that, we can also add in some other grappling forms because they still fall under wrestling. So why do I say the wrestler is a superior athlete? One, so old school catch-can matches used to last well over an hour of two men, anywhere from 5'8", 195 pounds to 6'2", 235 pounds, would try to pin and submit the opposing side for more than one match. So one match could last an hour. It was the best 2 out of 3. So if we go into a caloric scale, those 2 to 3 hours, because typically it was a one for one, and then the final match was what really gave it in. That 3 hours of matches is equal to, in a caloric level, to a marathon, due to oxygen deprivation, muscular damage to muscles over time. They have the highest levels of lactic acid buildup tolerance, among other things. Second is why I think they're the superior athlete. When we talk about athletics, we're not talking about just somebody's ability to move at a quick pace or all of this. It's an all-encompassing term for someone with high levels of hand-eye coordination, agility, speed, accuracy. All of these together are more than just the simple ability to move from one place to another as quick as possible. Also in that realm of pure athletics, wrestlers are known for high levels of weightlifting on top of high levels of endurance training. So you have a wrestler, me, as an anecdotal statement, I have posted a 275-pound clean and jerk, a 225-pound snatch, 500-pound squat, 500-pound deadlift, 275-pound bench press. I am getting ready to be certified as a shooter in catch-as-catch-can wrestling. I've wrestled for quite some time. I've competed in catch wrestling tournaments. I've competed in normal wrestling, folk and Greco, in multiple places. I can run. The best 2-mile time I've ever done was 10:45. The best 5-mile I've done was just a little over 33 minutes. I have done half marathons for 5 days straight. And I can tell you, I would much rather run a marathon than I would do a 2-hour Kumite-style wrestling event, because it's so much harder on the body. And not only is it so much harder on the body, it takes so much more central nervous system synapses in wrestling than it does in an endurance sport or any other sport for that matter. It exceeds the central nervous system synapse complex of football, basketball, baseball. And so it's just a superior sport in that way, and that's why those athletes are superior in every way. Third, when it comes outside of the realm of athletics, wrestlers by and large have been the best role models for athletes. Outside of the Foxcatcher incident, you find far less than any other sport issues with drug abuse, with people lying, cheating, and stealing. There seems to be some moral imperative built into wrestling, as it is a combat and a martial art, that makes the person also morally superior to other athletes. I mean, you've got guys like Dave Schultz, Dan Gable. These guys are some of the greatest heroes that America's ever had. Kurt Angle. And then we go to WWE. You've got Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He set up a generation. Stone Cold Steve Austin. Hulk Hogan. Ric Flair. These men that have set aside their lives and their time to mold a generation of Americans towards American pride and American love. And if that doesn't make them a superior athlete, I don't know what is.
So there are a lot of sports that go for an hour. The record for the half marathon, 58 minutes. The American record, 59:40, and that's. Now remember, to run, most people cannot run a sub. Well, I would guess that probably half the population at least couldn't do a sub-8. These elite marathoners are doing 26 miles at a 4:44 pace about. So that's a 1:10 400-meter sprint. Most people, the vast majority of people, can't do a 1:10 around the track. These people are doing 104 of them, 105 of them. So as far as superior ability and mental ability as well, I think the marathoner, and even more so the Ironman, the Iron athlete, the triathlete, and the record for that is 8 hours and 6 minutes and 30 seconds by a German, and the female is 8:46:46 of Switzerland. So again, you're talking about time. I think the triathlete, even more so than the marathoner, is a true all-around athlete. That's swim, bike, run. Now, that's not something I do because I don't like to swim or bike, but they go for 8 hours. So imagine going at an extremely high level for 8 hours. So you're talking about like 1 to 2 hours, maybe 3 hours. Tennis, they do for 6 hours. A solid marathoner will do for about 2 hours and 15 minutes. Again, at a 4:45 sub 5-minute pace, which is an extremely fast pace for anybody. Just to do 1 mile, they do 26.2. And an Iron athlete's going to do that for 8 hours and probably 9 hours typically. So I think as far as grueling, I'd say that the Iron athlete has the most grueling. And if you want, so basically I'm saying runners. I think so we're doing this both from subjective viewpoints, obviously. But the runner, the guy that bases his sport in just running, is superior athlete in my mind, anyways. And again, that's because it's a physically demanding thing to do. I mean, you talk about the pounding on your body. Typically, runners are to do a marathon distance. You have about a 5 to 10 year period where you're going to be at that prime age to compete. Look at Galen Rupp; he's just getting into it. Typically, it's like 25 to 35 years old. Sometimes you can stretch it out into your late 30s. And as far as what do you say about death? I think you said something about death. I missed number 2. Shoot. Well, a lot of athletes actually do die. There are a lot of athletes that, because it is so grueling, that they will collapse as they approach the finish line because of the mental toll that it takes, and they kind of mentally, they get that weird, like, I'm finished feeling, and they give up, which I think kind of shows the mental strain that it puts on it, the mental ability that's required. But yeah, I mean, it's so physically demanding that at least 1 to 2 athletes die just running a marathon every year. And as far as role models, I think that people like Bernard Lagat, who's made 5 Olympic teams, he made 5 Olympic teams from the 1500 up to the 5000. He just won at 39 years old. He won the American 5,000 meter championship at the Olympic trials that I'm still kicking myself that I didn't drive down and see, because I saw it last time, 2012. And we've got Meb Keflezighi, who's the American Olympic marathoner. He won Boston the year after the bombings. He's like this enormous American hero, just really amazing athletes. And they don't get the kind of play that wrestlers get, because, when we think of wrestling, we're thinking of some of the people you mentioned, the pro wrestlers, which are not really athletes. They're entertainers, right? They're actors. And I bring that up because I was just looking online today, about an hour ago, and I found this article, and it was on, I think, bodybuilding. Was it? Forum, bodybuilding.com. And somebody wrote in, "Are wrestlers athletes?" And he said, "I think we've had this discussion before, but the reason I asked is because Impact Magazine just named Bret Hart the greatest Canadian male athlete of the last 20 years, beating out the likes of Steve Nash, Thorin Fleury, Kurt Browning, and several other Olympians. Apparently now there's a big stink from some people that think Bret shouldn't have won because he's an entertainer and not an athlete." Bret took to his Twitter and asked people if wrestlers are athletes or not, citing that if figure skaters and synchronized swimmers are considered athletes. So I think the aura of the wrestler being an athlete is questionable. Most people don't think of wrestlers as athletes. I would say that some wrestlers are athletes. They're athletic. But again, they have a choreographed entertainment. It's basically it's like a movie going on in the ring, right?
So let's talk about Bret Hart real quick. So Bret Hart, I'm getting a little feedback. Okay. So Bret Hart was not only just a WWE, WWF wrestler, right? He was in Canada. His father, Stu Hart, could have easily made the Olympic team. And his father was one of the last Canadian hookers. Hookers is a term that we use in catch-as-catch-can wrestling to signify someone. Yeah. So it signifies someone who's met the top of the game. It's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or a black belt in another martial art. That's what a hooker is for a catch wrestler. So he was one of the last great hookers, and his son was also a hooker. Very good. You can actually see the Hart lineage in the British Bulldog's son. He is a great Greco wrestler. He does great work in catch-as-catch-can with Scientific Wrestling Camp with Josh Barnett. So, you can say that they're not, by and large, athletes, but all of them are yoked to the gourd. All of them have really high jumps. All of them have really high speed. They take more bumps than any human should, night in and night out. It's not like they just do it on Saturdays and Sundays. You know, they've got 3 days of training during travel times, and they're taking bumps in between those, putting on other shows. That amount of physicality alone makes them a superior athlete to someone who runs. But let me get back to the statement of athlete. So I gave you the definition of athlete. And I want to stick to that because that's really what we're talking about. We're not talking about someone who has the ability to endure long distances. Because don't get me wrong, wrestlers are known for their impeccable endurance. It's something that other grappling forms really hate about wrestlers is that they are so durable and they have such high levels of endurance because their training is just god awful in comparison to other people's. But when I say athlete, I don't just mean that ability to take grueling damage, be it from another person or from the ground when running or swimming and things of that nature. I mean that the athlete has the ability to lift, to run, to have high levels of hand-eye coordination. How much central nervous system is this person using per each move? And I can promise you that a shot, which is what you do in wrestling. You take a shot, which is where you see them dive in on one knee, slide the next knee, and get like two hands hooked to a lift. That amount of central nervous system being used is far superior to someone who runs, swims, or bikes, because those are, for the most part, what would you consider very straightforward stationary movements. Now, granted, they're moving, but those are not, you're not building new pathways for your central nervous system. Imagine the deadlift, right? So people think deadlift is a strength exercise. Well, it's a central nervous exercise. And you can imagine that a wrestler has to use a compound muscular system exercise every time they do an attack or every time they defend an attack. Now, they have to have the ability to have presence of mind while this is going on. So the amount of muscular drain is almost secondary to the amount of central nervous system drain, which is far more draining at a level. So endurance athletes versus powerlifters, right? A powerlifter who's hitting an 800-pound deadlift, the amount of central nervous system that he uses, it encompasses about the same amount of caloric action of someone who runs a half marathon, because the central nervous system burns calories at a much faster rate than the actual muscular system does. So again, when I lay it out that way, sure, some of these athletes are great at what they do, but they are not able to encompass their skills and abilities into other arenas, which is something a wrestler can do. Brock Lesnar, he went from NCAA to WWE to MMA, and he stayed at the top of the class the whole time because what he earned from wrestling made him a superior athlete. He was a superior athlete when he went through football. He was a superior athlete when he went through wrestling, both ways. And when he got to MMA, he even got to show off his superior athletics there. I mean, this guy's a monster, and it's not built on anything other than his wrestling background. Same with Kurt Angle. I mean, he won an Olympic medal with a fractured neck. I don't see other athletes willing to take that risk, because it's not necessarily that they won't do it. There's plenty of athletes that have broken a foot and ran and jumped on the trapeze and stuff like that. But, you know, this is someone who's going to break their foot, whereas Kurt Angle was so confident in his ability to win that he was willing to say that even if my neck is fractured, I'm still going to go out there where if one bump goes wrong, I'm going to die to win a gold medal. Now, onto the American hero. You name some names that nobody knows who they are. No one knows who they are except for people that are like in the running, right? But I can name Hulk Hogan. You know how many people know Hulk Hogan? All of them. Everyone knows Hulk Hogan.
But I don't think very many people know who he is, though. Like, he's a TV personality. He's a name that people might know, but I think very few people know who he is or really anything about him.
Really? They don't know? I am American, fight for the right of every man. Hey, brother.
Nobody's gonna know that.
Take your body. Yes, they do. He's voted one of the most 10 famous faces.
Hulk Hogan is, I don't think anybody knows.
Come on.
But if you mention Hulk Hogan, people are going to think of him as a world wrestling entertainment.
Sure.
They don't think of him as
think of him as an
actual
athlete.
wrestler. Nobody thinks of Ric Flair. People think of Ric Flair as whatever. I forget what he used to say.
Woo!
Anything, yeah, woo! And that's not an athletic jive right there. It's not an athletic motion to go woo.
Really?
I mean, they really are. They're entertainers, right? I think you would have to admit that the WWE is an entertainment industry. It is like this guy, they call it a circus or something. It's a lot more like a circus than an athletic competition. Everything is mapped out, choreographed.
That doesn't matter. That doesn't stop it from being an athletic endeavor.
Just because it's not an unathletic endeavor. I mean, I'd say
okay, so you admit that they're athletes.
Huh?
You admit that they're athletes. If it's not an unathletic endeavor, then they're athletes.
No, I'm not saying they're not athletes. I'm saying that they are. I'm not saying they're not athletes. I don't think you have to be a superior athlete to be a WWE entertainer. I mean, you look at some of the people. Andre the Giant.
What about him? He was an amazing athlete for the man of that size.
But he wasn't very athletic.
Yes, he was. In his younger days before.
Very slow. I don't think he was. I don't think people would consider him as being this tremendous superior athlete. He was a massive man, yeah, but
before before his injuries took apart his body, yeah, he was an amazing athlete. I mean, he played basketball. He was awesome, but he always said, and by the way, he had trained under some original hookers from France. Yeah, he was a great wrestler up until injuries. Same with the Big Show, right? He's an amazing wrestler. He's 7'1", close to 500 pounds, and used to be able to cut a backflip. That's pretty athletic. That's astonishingly athletic.
But who is that? I don't think anybody knows who these people are. I mean, people watch. So we actually have a couple people in the group that are huge fans of WWE. We could see what they think. But I think even fans of WWE, they're not going to say that these wrestlers are the superior athlete.
Well,
athletic, clearly. I mean, clearly they're athletic. They're strong. You talked about some of the guys that are just yoked. They're more like bodybuilders. And that's why this bodybuilding.com actually had the article, and they're mad that they don't compete in a real sport but still end up with all the injuries because athletes compete in sports, pro wrestlers do not. Chess, NASCAR are more sporting than pro wrestling. I don't know about that, but NASCAR is pretty athletic actually too, but you wouldn't think of that either. I wouldn't call them superior athletes by any means, though.
Right. Here's my thing. I've given you 3 arguments, and not all of them revolve around the WWE. I told you that it's wrestler is a broad term.
Well, you said role models.
Right. Well, I mean, they are part of the role model system, and I didn't just name them. I also named Kurt Angle, who does both, who's an Olympic gold medalist. I named Dave Schultz, who was a really big impact on American wrestling. Jordan Burroughs, Kyle Day.
I don't see them as being role models for Americans. I don't think anybody knows who these people are. I do think that if you went out and asked who somebody like Meb is, he's one of these guys with one name. Everybody knows who Meb is. He's an Olympic athlete. He won Boston the year after the bombing. He like this great American hero for going out and by the way, he beat people that had that were tremendously faster than him, and he beat them. So, you said running is just basically running from A to B. It's not about speed. It's about tactics, intelligence. Running is vastly more than just being able to go out and blow past your competitors. There is significant. If you go past the 200 meters, it's a lot of tactics. Even the 400 requires a little bit of tactics. You can't like blow all your energy. You have a certain amount of energy, and you have to perfectly expend it between these 2 points. And it's very difficult. It takes a lot of mental training, a lot of obviously a tremendous amount of physical ability. But I think if you watch the 800 is one of the most entertaining races there is. There's a famous 1976 Olympics, I think. I'll have to post that video. It's really a pretty awesome video. Guy came from like 20 meters back. But the kick, right? I don't know if you watched the 1500. That was another great show, another great role model. So Matt Centrowitz went out, and he being slower than anybody else, he still outthought them and outcompeted them, because it is a tremendous athlete to go out and to go run the 1500. So I think different forms. He talked about going from one sport to another. There's a lot of runners that go from, they say, 1500 to the marathon. That's a huge swing. I mean, just look at the people that run these distances. They're very different looking athletes. So I think as far as the athlete's ability to compete in different sports, running the 1500 and running the marathon it's a pretty different sport. I would say even the ultra marathoner is really one of the ultimate athletes. You talk about running for 10 hours, running up and over Mount Everest twice, and doing the whole thing at 10,000 feet. Yeah, I think that's pretty superior right there.
In what? In endurance? Sure, I'll give you that. Endurance. I mean, there's been...
It's more than just endurance, though. It takes a significant amount of strength, mental ability.
No, it does not take strength.
Oh, yeah, to climb up and over Mount Everest twice. That's the amount of elevation they do in the hard rock. And you're doing it at 8,000 feet. So, I mean, you and me, we live at sea level, right?
I go up 1,200 above.
You what?
1,200 above.
Yeah, so I've gone up to like 2,000 feet, and I feel it. I could not possibly imagine going up to 8,000 feet of elevation and trying to run 100 miles.
I can tell you this: I've been at 8 to 10,000 feet, and I've walked well over 10 miles with 130 pounds on my back.
Yeah, but now drop the 130 pounds and try running up and over hills the whole time.
Right. Well, I mean,
finding your way as well. You have to follow the course. You got to run at night. Scott Jurek talked about he was,
So I've done missions at night, walking up mountains, shelf.
Yeah, well, Scott, 100 miles at 7-minute pace, no, and up and over these mountains. Scott Jurek talks about how he was at mile 35.
Than carry the 130 pounds for hours on end.
So one of the guys in my class was telling me that if you get to the right angle, it's not as hard. Now I have bad back, so I couldn't do it, but.
Yeah, well, you don't get to pick your angle.
Scott Jurek talks about he stepped in a hole at, I think it was mile 35 or something. He stepped in a hole, his ankle swelled up. He got to the next aid station. I think he might have wrapped it up, and he finished. He still won the race. He still won the race. Again, 100-miler. The Western States. He won Western States 7 straight times. Again, 100 miles from Auburn to somewhere else in California. You can do the other ones he's done. He's done the Badwater, which is you start in Badwater in the middle of July. It's 286 feet below sea level, and you run up to 5,000 feet elevation, Mount Whitney. You do it in July, so it's 130, 140 degrees there on the blacktop, doing 100 miles. These races take superior athletic ability. So running is much, much more than just being about the speed going from A to B. It takes a tremendous amount of mental ability, pushing yourself through puking. There's a lot to it. It's tremendously difficult. And I mean, you've done it. You said you did 5 miles in 33 minutes, so that's about a what? You've probably done a 39-minute 10K, 38-minute 10K, which is 39-minute 10K, which is pretty darn good. Anything under 40 is pretty good. But to win it, you got to do it in about 22 minutes, 21 minutes. So,
right, but here's the thing. one, you've managed to take the best of the best and state it as the superior, right? And that's just not true that of what I'm doing. I'm just giving you names under my third argument as to the greats and what they've done in society. But I'm talking about in general. I'm talking about in general.
Yeah, but so are we. I mean, if you're talking about the superior, you're not going to say that all wrestlers are tremendous athletes, are you? You ever had like a wrestler on your team that was a slacker?
Sure, but if I took the average wrestler versus the average non-wrestler, I'm always going to give the edge to the wrestler. And I can tell you this from a military standpoint. The best people that I ever worked with were wrestlers. They always had the highest level of endurance. They always ran the fastest. I was always top of the pack, but I was always beat by a collegiate wrestler. I'll give you his last name. His last name is Cotman. He did his 5 miles in 29 minutes. The man was smoking fast, and he was a collegiate level wrestler, but he wasn't like NCAA. I mean, he was like NJCAA level, and he was by far one of the best athlete in our unit. And this is coming. I mean, and this is from a military perspective, where we're at the top 1% of athletics in the United States anyway. There's many of the folks in the military that are just unbelievably high level athletes. I mean, from the CrossFit games to the 5'11" games to marathons.
The games are tremendous athletes as well.
They are, but they're not that great. They're not as good as the wrestler. And I'm gonna give you a quote from Socrates, because we can't have a debate without throwing in Socrates. I swear it upon Zeus, an outstanding runner cannot be the equal of an average wrestler. That's coming from Socrates. I mean,
okay. So during his time, by the way, running was more of a sprinting, was more of the sport. But you want to talk about runners, the guy that ran the first marathon. Now, everybody knows the myth that he ran across the marathon plane which is a 25-mile plane, 26 miles he ran. And he said, what did he say? Victory or something like that. And then collapsed and died, right?
Sure.
Well, you know the myth, though, right? The legend.
I've heard of it. I never really cared because it's running.
But even you heard about it.
Yeah, well, I've always been told that wrestler quote my entire life too.
No. So what he actually did, the people that were probably the most important people in the war effort were the messengers. And so Philippides, and there's actually a run, it's an ultramarathon that goes from Troy to Athens. I think it's 165 miles, right? It's 6 marathons, and you have 36 hours to complete it. And it does half of what Philippides did. What Philippides did is he ran from something to Troy to the battlefield. He ran 165 miles to the battlefield. And then they said, okay, I forget. I'll post the exact story, but he ran about 350 miles, right, in about probably 2 or 3 days or so. That's why he collapsed, and he did it on figs and maybe dried meats. And so he didn't even have the kind of stuff we have today. So the superior athlete of Socrates' time was even the runner, was the messenger. He wasn't really thought of as an athlete, but he was the messenger, and they were the professional pigeons of the day, messenger pigeons of the day. They would run hundreds of miles in a week, getting messages back and forth. Well, anyways, he wanted to go to, I think, they needed backup, and he was supposed to go get backup, and they were doing one of their orgy festivals, and so they were having too much sex. They couldn't make it for 6 days or something. And so he had to run all the way back to the battlefield and tell them they're on their way, but they're not going to be here for 6 days and all that. So said the 300.
Here's the thing. When that runner ran to go tell someone, he grabbed a bunch of wrestlers who went out and fought the battle as he ran away. Now, that's a moral imperative. This guy is willing to run away from battle to go tell people, which don't get me wrong is an important
Because
duty.
the wrestlers needed help. The wrestlers couldn't do it. They
Right,
knew
but
that
they had to go get more wrestlers. They had to go get more wrestlers so that they could defeat the other wrestlers on the other side. See,
the
again,
Romans weren't wrestlers. They were stabbers. They were actual hookers. They had spikes.
Oh, no. Every single military system on the face of the planet has integrated wrestling. Every single military system.
Wrestling, even grappling. It's some kind of hand-to-hand combat, yeah.
The Hellenistic period, the Grecian period, the Roman period, they all did wrestling. Now, it had a different name. It was called pancrase and pancration, but it's still fundamental to what we now call Greco-Roman wrestling. Do you ever think about that? That's the point that I'm trying to make here, is that is a moral imperative.
Look at the Roman Grecian wrestlers. They do not. Nobody would look at them and say, "Oh my God, that's an athletic person right there." Look at the American that beat the Russian in 2004, I think it was. He was a farmer, but he was huge, and he wasn't muscular. He was non-muscular. So,
and
if I were to go out and poll people, who's the greatest athlete? They'd probably name LeBron or somebody like that. But
I'm sure they would, but I don't see. I would love to see Jordan Burroughs and LeBron in a CrossFit competition, because I'm 100% positive that Jordan Burroughs, despite his lack of size, would out deadlift, out bench press, out clean and jerk, out sprint, out run. I don't know about sprint, maybe, because I think LeBron is like a high 440, but I think Jordan Burroughs is probably pretty close. I think I read him as like a 4.940. But at long distance running, he would destroy LeBron. And then when they went to their sports, I think Jordan Burroughs could probably compete better in his system as like against a point guard from the NBA than LeBron could against a super heavyweight in wrestling.
Well, I'd say, just looking it up right here, the greatest athletes of all time, I don't think you're going to have very many wrestlers. From Simone Biles to Usain Bolt, top 10 athletes, I think LeBron was number one. I wouldn't even know it. Nobody else would either. But if there were any wrestlers on there. Got best athletes of all time. Usually the greatest athlete in the world is the winner of the decathlon. That's Ashton Eaton, which is actually how this got started. But I mean, if you look it up, greatest athlete of all time, you're gonna have more famous people. And again, nobody knows who these wrestlers are. 10 best male athletes of all time. Usain Bolt's on there. Russell Wilson's on there for some reason. You have a lot of tennis stars, and I'd say the tennis athlete is a pretty athletic person. They're doing like 5 or 6 hours of intensive, grueling sport, and not just running from side to side, but they got to swing a racket and hit a ball that's coming at them at 120 miles an hour.
Maybe if Andy Roddick is hitting it.
Well, 130 is the record, I think. So they're probably, even when they're tired, they're hitting pretty heavy.
Right. That's Andy Roddick. Most of them average like 105. Andy Roddick just had like a special ability to smash it. I think even Roger Federer, I think his best was like 119. Anyway. Right. And I agree with that. And I don't really care what those say, because they're not really topical to this debate, because they're also not even your points that you're making. So they're rather useless in this. But like I've said, I've given you 3 good arguments as to why I'm right. And those arguments are foundational, right? So the first one, right, their endurance. I talked about the old school catch matches. I talked about, and I'll bring up another point about old school catch guys. Billy Wicks, right? He used to work carnivals, carnivals and circuses, which is something you said, right? Back in the day, carnivals and circuses used to travel around the United States, and they would challenge everyone to catch matches. Now, I'm sure you've been to a fair or a circus or a carnival. There's a lot of people that walk around, and there's a lot of drunk people who like to go up there. But these guys would wrestle nonstop for 8 hours and not lose a lick to the entire population of whatever city they were doing. They didn't have breaks, and if they lost, they didn't eat. So it was an imperative for them to win at all costs. So you can imagine traveling every day, wrestling 8 hours, anywhere, anytime, any size, a day. Secondly, I gave you the second argument about that I'm not just basing athletics off of endurance. I'm basing it off the ability that the person has in the central nervous system, and their ability for hand-eye coordination, speed, strength, and the overall aspect of athletics, being able to pick up other sports and these things. And my third argument is the moral statement that I think wrestlers tend to be morally superior and less incorrigible than other forms of sports.
Well, so on the last one, I'd say Hulk Hogan has had a scandal. I'm sure other wrestlers have had scandals, but talk about moral superiority. I think runners hit that. Maybe not in other countries, but in America, yeah, I think if you go into a high school and you talk to the wrestlers, I don't think they're going to be very likable people. But the runners, because they're typically outcasts, have a lot of camaraderie. There's a lot of camaraderie in running. Because it is a grueling, difficult, running is typically the punishment for wrestlers, right? For baseball players who tend to be the worst of the worst character-wise in high school, but maybe football. But running is the punishment for all those sports. And I think to choose to run, which is other sports' punishments, tends to build a lot of character as well. So I think as far as moral superiority, I'd say the runners get that. Total ability and overall athletic ability, I say there's maybe the triathlete, but I mean, yeah, I realize you're saying that they are the best of these three, but I would say the triathlete. I don't know of any scandals in runners. I don't. As someone that follows them, I know that there's some of the drug scandals in overseas, but not in the American distance running. So. And overall ability, I'd say there's a lot of mental toughness. The 100-miler takes it takes agility, it takes tenacity, it takes everything that you were mentioning. And again, in the endurance, you're actually talking about 20, 25 hours on your feet running out there to win one of those 100-mile races. So.
Right. I want to make a statement real quick about the moral statement, and this goes back to the Grecian periods and things of that nature, and especially as from a military standpoint, the military runs a lot, and it's foundational to the exercise. But I promise you, when you talk about the best runner, it's never really in a good way, and I mean this in all sincerity, because running is not something you should do when it comes to combat. So there's that moral imperative. I don't want the guy who's the great runner in the combat if I have a wrestler by my side. And that's kind of what Socrates meant when he made that quote. Running is for when you're losing. I don't want to lose. I want to have the wrestler mind point that, the strong man is not the good wrestler. The strong man is only the one who controls himself when he is angry. That kind of style, not the I'm going to run because things are getting hard or because I need to go out and relieve stress. Wrestlers don't relieve stress by wrestling. Wrestlers break stress away from them. And that's a moral imperative that I'm talking about, especially when it comes to combat. One of the debates that Joel DeMose has posted is like the infantry is still the center of the military. When it comes down to it, the wrestler is still the center of the world when it comes to sports, because it doesn't matter if you can beat me in basketball. If I can shoot in on you, take you down, and cross-face the hell out of you, you're never going to want to play me in basketball again, and it doesn't matter if you win, because you'll give up next time I step on the court.
So you're saying runners are cheaters?
I'm saying runners.
Say wrestlers are
I'm
cheaters.
saying running is a feminine thing to do.
Running is necessary for war.